So I want you to know how hard Pastor Alex has worked these past 16 weeks. He has worked really hard. Yes. We are so blessed to have Pastor Alex and Pastor Lauren leading us. So every now and then we need to give him a little break. So as a lay preacher, we're giving him a little break today so that I can give you the word and give him a little bit of a break. So Eli and Samuel were fast asleep. Well, sometimes when we're fast asleep, something suddenly wakes us up in the middle of the night. So for Pastor Alex, it might be Nadia. Happens a lot, I think. For me, it might be, something goes bump in the night. I'm like, well, what is it? Is it a car backfiring? Is there an accident out in the street? And that's happened. Is it an inebriated student banging on my door? And that has happened. For Samuel, it was God calling his name. So we're picking up from last week's story with Moses and the manna. The Israelites were wandering through the wilderness for 40 long years, and a new generation enters the promised land. But life there is filled with conflict, war, chaos, and civil unrest have taken hold to the point where all the people just did whatever was right in their own eyes. The system of judges had failed miserably, and the nation was literally falling apart. Who would God send to speak to this mess? Well, in 1 Samuel begins with Hannah, Samuel's mother. She was unable to have children, and she prays earnestly to God, and God answers. From an abundance of gratitude and keeping her promise, she dedicates her son to God's service. So once Samuel is weaned, about 3 years old or so, she brings him to live with the priest Eli in the temple. Now, that might seem strange to us, but it wasn't unusual in the time. Hannah's dedication of her son to the Lord is a bit like the sacrament of baptism, entrusting her child fully to God. We affirm the same in baptism. Our children ultimately belong to God, not to us. So now as a young boy, he's maybe 12 or 13, Samuel is still relying on Eli for his instruction. He's basically a priest in training. In many ways, like our confirmation students. He trusts Eli's faith and Eli's guidance. But we're told that he didn't yet know the Lord. He was learning about God, but hadn't yet formed his own relationship with God. It's kind of like our own children. We teach them about God and God's love, but eventually they must come to know and trust God for themselves. In those days, the Word of God was rare. There wasn't a clear sense of direction from God. Well, that's not because God wasn't present. God was there. It's just that the people weren't listening. They weren't paying attention. And now Eli's eyes had grown old and weak so that he could not see. Often in a biblical context, this inability to see has double meanings: physically unable to see and spiritually unable to see, to discern. We recall the story of Isaac, who wasn't even able to tell which son this was that he was touching. Both Eli and Samuel were sleeping in the temple, and young Samuel hears his name called in the middle of the night. He wakes up, and naturally he thinks it's Eli. So he runs to Eli and answers, "Hineni, here I am, ready to do whatever bidding you ask me to do." But Eli says, "I didn't call you. Go back to kid, boy. Go back to bed. Don't bother me." Well, this happens 3 times. Finally, Eli realizes that it's God who is calling the boy. So then he tells Samuel, "Go back to bed, and when you hear the voice again, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant is listening.'" He empowers Samuel to hear God for himself, to have his own experience with God. He doesn't say, "Well, now God's calling, so give me the phone and I'll talk to him." He gives it to Samuel to answer God. Even when God speaks his name, though, Samuel doesn't know it's God. It takes another person, Eli, to help him know that it's God's voice. And that's true for us, too. We still need others to affirm that, yes, that's God speaking into our hearts. That's one reason for our community of faith, to help each other, to see and respond to God's call. We need each other to help us pay attention and recognize when God speaks. I can say that happened to me when Pastor Alex approached me and said, "Hey, could you maybe be interested in the Lay Ministry Academy?" I'm like, "What's that?" And I had to go and think about it for a while. But God was speaking through Pastor Alex. That was a call. And even though Samuel didn't know God, God knew him. God called Samuel by name, and God calls us by name. We may dismiss God's call or attribute it to someone or something else, just like Samuel thought Eli was the one who was calling him. And most people, they won't describe their call as some traumatic event like the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus, or Martin Luther when he was riding through the storm and here comes lightning striking him. More often, it's a quiet, gradual awakening, a holy nudge that grows stronger over time. God's call may come when we least expect it, and often to those we might least expect, even those who are afraid that they aren't up to responding to the call, even those who are unwilling. Are we willing to listen to God speaking directly to us through the busyness of our daily lives, when we're concerned about raising our families, keeping our jobs, taking care of our homes? How do we recognize that it's really God's voice? Do we allow others to guide us? We as the church need to be like Eli, helping each other to listen for God's voice. God is persistent. God calls again and again, not just once and done. If we don't get it at first, we're in good company. The Gospels portray Jesus' disciples as not really getting it most of the time. They were in many ways the disciples when Jesus was teaching them. But Jesus didn't give up on them, and God does not give up on calling us. God will try again, perhaps another time or in another place or through a different method. God persists, and God continues to call us throughout our lives. We may have many callings throughout our lives. And when you reflect back on the events of your life, you may recognize moments when God was speaking to you. You may recognize some of the attempts God made through others or through your life experiences. Our church itself has experienced the persistence of God, even when our trust in God's providence is challenged. But first, we must stop and listen. Both Eli and Samuel were in a position of stillness. They weren't necessarily listening for God's voice, at least not first, but neither were talking. In this stillness, Samuel hears a voice calling his name. If Samuel were in a flurry of activity or otherwise distracted by many things, he might have missed it entirely. We must first stop and listen. Listening is a key spiritual practice that opens space to hear God's voice. And next, we must respond. Eli tells Samuel to respond to the call by saying, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." He equips Samuel. Eli understands that he's not the one who can do it. It must be Samuel. It's a transitional moment in Samuel's life. Samuel has said, "Hineni," to Eli. And now he says, "Hineni," to God. I am here. But the trouble is, we might not always like what we hear. What Samuel hears is difficult. It's God's judgment against Eli's family because his sons had corrupted their priestly duties. They were stealing from the offerings and abusing their community of faith. There's no denying that God's message can be hard. And Samuel is afraid to relay this message to his mentor, who had been guiding him throughout his childhood years. So Samuel lay there until morning, afraid. But when Samuel eventually told Eli God's words, Eli, to his credit, accepted them. Now he knew that God would be working through Samuel instead of him. The truth is, God still calls. God equips all of us with gifts, interests, and talents to be used to bless one another, whether in our homes, in the workplace, in our communities, or in our church. The question is, what will we do with them? Do we ignore injustices because we don't want to confront, or because we're too busy? Do we make excuses, stay silent, and then complain that our lives are unfulfilled? Or will we use what God has given us to bless others as well as ourselves? God calls us to respond to our neighbors, the hungry, the lonely, the fearful. God calls us to trust, even when it's difficult, and to speak up when it matters. Answering this call is how we live the life God intends for us, the life Jesus described when he sums up the greatest commandment, to love God and to love our neighbors. So the question remains, how will we respond to God's call in our lives, individually and together? Transformation begins when we say, like Samuel, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." That's when God does something new through us. That's when our Hineni, here I am, becomes the start of God's work in us and through us. Thanks be to God.